Don't know.
What you can see on the video.
Right, members, shall we make a start? Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Constitution and Ethics Committee. The Council, as you know, allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit, which is through the middle doors on my left, and assemble in the car park. So, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor Bird, and Councillor Boulas is here as a substitute. Councillor Maguire and Councillor Goldstack is here. Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Wilson, and Councillor Slasher is here as a substitute.
Splendid, thank you very much. Can I ask if any member wishes to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? There being none, we move on to item number 2, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of September. Are you happy that I sign these minutes as a true record of the meeting? I'm assuming silence is acquiescence. Splendid, thank you very much. We move on to then agenda item number 3, the annual budget meeting business plan debate, and that is to be introduced by the Service Director of Legal and Governance, Ms. Duncan. Oh, Mrs. Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. This report actually formalises a process that we've had for many, many, many years, which is for your budget meeting in February. We have a protocol in order to be able to deal with that meeting in a specific way. We've had that protocol, as I said, for a long time. It's been agreed by group leaders and we circulate it in advance. The only problem with the protocol is that we are asking you to do something before you've actually agreed it at full council for it to come into effect. So for practical reasons and for good practice, it makes a lot of sense to incorporate the protocol within the Constitution. That way it is transparent and accessible to members of the public. When watching the budget debate, they can see how it should operate. But I just want to reassure members that there is nothing new within the Constitution that has not been within the protocol, that we have operated with the agreement of all group leaders and all parties for many, many years.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. You will see the amendments are on pages 26, 27 and 28 of your agenda. Did you want to add anything, Emma? No. No. Splendid. Anybody want to say anything on this matter? The issue is we are asked to recommend to full council these revisions to the Constitution as set out. Happy with that, everyone? Splendid. We move on in that case to item number 4, which is Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Health and Wellbeing Board revised terms of reference. And we are asked to recommend these revised terms of reference to full council for approval. Right, who's doing this one? Michelle.
Again, the first thing I need to stress with this report is that these terms of reference need to be agreed not only by the Health and Wellbeing Board and Integrated Care Partnership, which did meet on the 20th of October to go through them, but more importantly, they need to be formally agreed by both authorities, which is us and Peterborough City Council. So whilst I welcome comments, it will be quite challenging if we make any changes because Peterborough City Council need to do exactly the same as we are doing. So I think it's best to set that out in context. The changes themselves are not that significant in the sense that we need to reflect the new arrangements that have come in as regards the children's and adults regarding the executive directors. Before we had Charlotte Black covering both areas and for both councils as well, I think. So now we have split that so that we have one representative from Peterborough, one from Cambridgeshire, and they are covered by the executive director that's available. Also, there's a need to clarify the role of the mayor and an officer from the combined authority, which you can see there. Other things that have been touched on are the quorum and the appointment of substitute members and members' conduct. And unfortunately, we haven't highlighted the actual changes in the appendix because that's not the way it went to the Health and Wellbeing Board. But as I say, they're quite minor in comparison, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Splendid. Thank you very much. Any questions for Mrs. Rowe? Any debate? Good. So I take it we are all agreed to recommend those revised terms of reference to full council. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 5, which is mitigating the risks of intimidation and abusive behaviours towards members and officers. You finally. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members. Members will be aware that we've brought to this committee before an action plan arising from the motion that was proposed at council some time ago to mitigate risks to members from abusive and threatening behaviour. This has been on the rise over the past few years, and the LGA have been leading the charge on this in terms of trying to put in place good practice. So the report updates members on the live action plan that we adopted, and you'll be able to see that at the first part of the report at section 2. I think substantially most of the issues have been completed. The only ones where they're still open are where they're an ongoing issue, and that we just need to continue doing them and reporting it to you. I think that the area of the paper that requires members' attention is section 3. There has been further webinars and guidance issued by the LGA on their Debate Not Hate campaign, and they've finalised 5 principles of good practice, which we would like to implement within Cambridgeshire. The first principle is really a zero tolerance approach to abuse. And this for us means really a statement on websites and social media platforms that we don't tolerate unacceptable behaviour by members of the public to members. That's fairly standard. You will have seen it in other public service settings. And certainly the LGA are very keen on that. They've produced a selection of tools which members can use on their own media profiles. And certainly for us, in terms of the website, we would be looking to potentially adopt the LGA model, and that appears at Appendix 1. The second point of principle is really clarifying who has responsibility for raising concerns and dealing with those. And for us, that's going to be Michelle, who is the single point of contact for reporting concerns and escalating them if appropriate. I think that for us, there's a communications issue there with members getting that out to all members, and the regular new member e-bulletin, which is currently in production, will be a useful point of reference for us to circulate information about those about the process for those concerns. The next point really is about fostering relationships with the police. We do have good relationships with the police, particularly around security in the building, but it's also important that police are kept up to date with any particular issues we have in response to members of the public that have presented a challenge to our staff or members, because you come in contact with the same people, and those processes are in place. We do have direct contact with the police, and we do advise them where this is an issue, and we will continue to do that if we consider that a member of the public is a health and safety risk to our staff or members. There was also another recommendation around risk assessments for members, because different members face different risks in relation to the activity that they undertake, and at different times as well. The risks go up and down and change shape. So actually understanding that and making sure that we're giving adequate sort of time and attention to risk assessments for members, sometimes members in particular circumstances where there is a lot of public interest. There can be a lot of unpleasant public interest on particularly fraught items. I think it's important that we adjust our risk assessments to reflect the situations that particular members will find themselves in. So the committee might want to consider things like a generic risk assessment for members in terms of who they come into contact with, and then specific risk assessments for members when the situation demands it. And prioritising your well-being. I'm not sure this is bringing back biscuits at meetings, but we have made the employee assistance programme available to members. But we also want to understand the needs of individual councillors, because you're not all the same. We certainly don't see you as all of the same. And we think it would be helpful to establish a small working group of members involving and officers involving democratic services, legal, health and safety and other relevant departments to identify any gaps that we have and share intelligence about common experiences, to carry out surveys of members to understand where you have issues and what we can help with, to create opportunities where members feel comfortable and in talking to officers about these things, and also establishing a wellbeing or councillor safety champion per political group who can collect information about members and what their needs are. That will be different for every single member. Some members are able to deal with things and at certain times, and sometimes those same members aren't able to deal with other things at other times. And how members respond to this will be predicated on what is happening in their lives at the time, how long it's been going on for, all of those things. So I don't want members to be treated as one homogenous group. Some members will require more support at some times than other members. But I do know that, with employees, sometimes, however strong you are, it's very difficult to deal with these circumstances because they can be quite unpleasant. So that's the report. The recommendations are to note the progress on the action plan, and also to consider those items that I've just identified at section 3 in terms of how you would like us to take those forward. Thank you, Chair.
Splendid. Thank you very much. Right. Speakers, who'd like to go first? Councillor Boulat.
Thank you, Chair. And it's great to see over the recent months this LGA Debate Not Hate campaign being promoted more in councils across the UK. Other councils have passed motions, such as we did in Cambridgeshire County Council. And it's great to see the councils of all political colours across the country actually endorsing this campaign, which is really important to have cross-party working on this to tackle the abuse and intimidation that some of us do face, which is unacceptable in any job. And being a councillor is a job in many ways. So I see this in terms of like a workers' rights issue, as well as like just preventing abuse and intimidation in public life more broadly. I just want to thank officers for working on this detailed plan. I personally found the briefing on the employee assistance program really useful, and this, as well as the in-person training done at New Shire Hall from the former police officer, which was really useful and really practical advice that actually encouraged me to take some actions myself in terms of thinking about my own circumstances. And as it was presented before, each of us have individual circumstances, so some solutions or some tips to improve our safety may work for some, but not for others. And just want to endorse what was said around the relationship with the local police is very important. So, for example, when I was elected as a councillor, I wasn't really used to be in contact with the police. I didn't really know who was responsible in my area, and actually for me developing this relationship with some police contacts locally has helped me as well. For example, especially if you're the only person from your political party and have to do surgeries on your own, actually having a surgery done in partnership with the neighborhood police officers or with someone else from the community safety team could be like a good idea for some members who perhaps don't feel comfortable being on their own in a library or in the community center if they don't have colleagues that they can do the surgeries together with. So I do endorse the recommendations, especially the further work that LGA did around social media. I think social media is really tricky because on the one hand, you have to enable a level of, freedom of speech on social media and people expressing their political views freely. But on the other hand, there are instances of actual, trolling and intimidation and very persistent people who complain. So I think there is a fine line to be drawn between what is acceptable and what is lines within the freedom of speech and what is actually hate speech on social media as well. So yeah, thank you very much for the report. It's great to see like one of the motions, one of the cross-party motions in our council actually having some practical results and an action plan as well. So yeah, thank you to officers for all your work on this.
Splendid, thank you. Councillor Slatter.
Yes, it's reassuring to hear that it's going to be individual risk assessments. I was just having a quick look at our website and the ways in which people might suddenly decide they want to get in touch with their councillor, might not have done before. Maybe in distress, they might be out for product. We don't know. And there are some of our councillors who are vulnerable, and we need to have that representation of people, either because they are physically vulnerable, and I can certainly think of one of the city council of councillors who we would not want to be necessarily known by address. And then there are other times when you really don't want phone calls. Other times you're happy. Now, what I've looked at is to see the people who are happy to have their stuff up there. Sometimes I would hope that it would be possible to change that if there's a difficult time for somebody or they've had a bad time. So you can take that phone number out if you suddenly don't want it to be as public as it was. That would be very useful to know it could be responsive. And the other thing is that where we have got county councillors who don't supply their personal details for whatever reason, perfectly reasonable ones, I'm sure, there isn't actually a phone number. There's care of member services. And I'm wondering if whether the splendid officers who do take the flak for us in other ways or do the work for us could be that phone number, because hopefully they are quite able and will get help if there's a particularly unpleasant phone call. But I think there are some people who do need the phone number. So it's just a thought that maybe if the officers, with due consideration for their well-being, can be acting as middle people for us, that would, I think, be helpful, and might be something you just need at some times and not others, but certainly for some councillors and not others. So thank you for treating us as individuals. Thank you.
Yes, I think it has to be a sort of flexible arrangement, doesn't it, to that extent?
Yeah.
Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. Just a few brief points. Firstly, to thank officers for all their work on this. It is extremely important, and I'm very grateful to them. Coming to the removal of information, addresses, phone numbers, whatever, from websites and so on, it is a problem that the internet is always with us. And it is very easy to find stuff. There's material hanging over everywhere. Whatever you try to remove, it is findable. So that is an ongoing risk, I think, whatever is done. The next point I wanted to make was, I think that there is a huge responsibility on elected members to damp down the kind of toxic atmosphere that we had over the last 12 months. It has been the worst I have ever known, and I have been a councillor on and off, mostly on, for over 30 years. It has been a horrendous experience for some members, and it is utterly, utterly appalling. And it is really important that those political friends of people who facilitate and promote those kind of things draw a line very firmly. Whatever you believe about an issue does not entitle you to publish material that is designed to intimidate, terrorize, threaten members of other groups with other opinions on matters. And it is down to everybody, all members across tiers, across parties, to stamp down on this when they see people in their camp, in their tribe, whatever, acting in that kind of way. And I would like to see more of that, because I think it's appalling. It's damped down for the moment, but it is always there, and I do not want to see that happen again. Next point I want to make is just that it's the personalised offer, I think, is a really good one, and I'm very grateful that that is available to people who need it. As has been said, our circumstances are all very different. Some of us have the benefits of a fairly robust constitution. Some of us are fortunate in the way we live our lives. Others are more vulnerable. They may live on their own. They may use public transport rather than sitting in the safety of a vehicle. They may feel that they are more vulnerable because of the location of where they live or who they know. And I think a personalized offer for those who need it is really very valuable, and I'm grateful that that's available to people. And I finally would say what I have said before, because it is so important, that the place where a councillor is most vulnerable is either at or going to or coming from a ward surgery. Nowhere is a member more vulnerable. You've advertised to thousands of people where you're going to be and when. The buildings aren't always such that they are safe from somebody coming in with malice aforethought. And the list is legion of politicians who have been injured or even killed in those circumstances. And I think really I would welcome support for all members and advice for all members on being, and it's a really important thing we do, being at a ward surgery, making yourself available to your constituents in every way you possibly can. And I would welcome a clear work stream of support around surgeries in particular, because that is a very dangerous situation that many members often put themselves in. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points from me. The first one really is a question, and that is that we have a few recognised individuals who continually contact the council and are dealt with via special measures. I don't really want to go any further than that, but I think members in the room know to whom I'm referring. But their information reaches other areas that comes back 360 to members who then have to try and defend it in other public examples, such as parish council meetings, other council meetings, etc., etc. And I think that's something that we need to have a look at and have a think about, that if we're dealing with what's proposed to be misinformation, misquestioning that's coming to us at this forum, then we can try and keep a lid on it in this forum, but actually that's equally shared elsewhere and it is still directed at us. So I think we need to have a think about that, and that's, I don't see that in here. So I think it's a good challenge, and I think that's something to pick up. The second point I want to make was, I know it's an example, but looking at the principle behind the Appendix 1 and putting that on a website, I think we've got to be careful not to be on too much of a slippery slope here. Rule 2, for example, posts should not contain abuse, harassment, intimidation, or threats of any form. I know what I mean by that, but I bet it's different to what somebody else means by that. We use the example, the three of my group members, we were chatting generally about social media earlier, and how the difference in the written word as opposed to the spoken word. I won't use the same example, gentlemen, that I used earlier, but if I was to say a certain expletive to you here now with a smile on my face, this will be the wrong forum, but in social, it's taken completely differently to if I was to put that in a text to you, or an email, or on social media, or on Twitter, or whatever, or X, or whatever it is these days. And I think that's something got to be. So I think, I don't know quite what I'm saying here, but what I'm saying is I think we've got to be careful before we put these things on the websites, because people say, well, what does that actually mean? Where are we at? And before we know it, we've got 3 pages of what we mean by this is this, what we mean by. So I'm just urging a little bit of caution around that. And I'm not sure we need to be black and white about it. I think it's very, very, I echo the comments that have come before me. And personalising this is the only way to do it. I think that's absolutely right. And for that reason, these rules won't always apply to everybody. Everybody will have a different interpretation of what it means to them personally. I also echo the comments of from opposite, which was you grow a thicker skin on this. You know, some people have got a lot thicker skin than others, and I think we've got to protect those that have, but also be cognizant that those that got thick skin, it gets through eventually. It does, you know, there is a torrent of abuse that only somebody can, and you find that, you know, I speak for myself. I probably don't take it out on the people involved. I probably take that out on a dog walk or something like that. But it you know what I mean? You're still fizzing about it, and you know, it'd be handy if we could have some tools and skills to help us deal with some of those matters sometimes. Just a way of dissipating that sometimes. So they always. But the main point really was around the be careful how we go with what we put on the website, because that can finish up asking more questions than it actually answers.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the comments that colleagues have made. I think it is important that we personalise this. Being a councillor means different things to different people, doesn't it? And often depends where you represent. Interested that Lorna mentioned about her surgeries. I don't tend to have surgeries because I represent quite a built-up area. So it might just be easy for me to go and see somebody, or district council headquarters are in my division. So I might just say to that person, as I'm doing next week, come into Pathfinder House, I'll meet you there and we'll go and chat to the appropriate housing officer in this case. So that's probably a bit easier for me. So I'd be in a more secure environment. The DWP are based in the building and the security around. So I have to be honest, though, I'm probably a little bit complacent about all this. I mean, I'm aware I'm a fairly tall, broad, middle-aged chap, so I probably don't tend to get physically intimidated very often by people. Not at all, but it's different if you're female, if you have a disability or something. You know, people can feel vulnerable, and there's something to be said for maybe, you know, you need a thick skin. You know, you will get a few pot shots occasionally. You put your head above the parapet, you put yourself out there. We want people to know who we are by definition, because we want to get elected. So it's important that we're well known. But I always think, you know, when people have a go at me, I think, okay, I can tolerate a little bit of that. I understand it. People are not happy. They're frustrated. Everyone's been through a very difficult time in the last few years. But I always think, well, how would that person feel if indeed I sent somebody an email? How would they feel if that were me? Would I like to receive that? Would I like that comment? We can always be a bit clever, can't we? Debate sometimes in our responses. So I think important to put yourself in the other person's shoe. But as for Councillor Goldsack, I think a dog walk is probably an excellent idea. Unfortunately, I don't have a dog, but I'll happily take yours for a walk if you want. And I don't know what breed you have, and somebody many years ago actually did say that to me. Variation maybe on the Harry Truman comment about if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. But having a dog and maybe taking it for a walk is a good way to unwind. But I you know, might just go for a walk instead or something. That's perhaps the easier way to deal with it. But seriously, nobody should tolerate abuse in what they do. We all do our best, and we all are basically hired or otherwise by the voters out there. So if people don't agree with us, they have a right to vote somewhere for somebody else, of course. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Dupre.
I'd just like to come back very quickly on something that Councillor Sanderson said, which suggested that he was that he could have a deal more confidence because of being a tall male person. And I would just like to be very clear that men aren't immune. And the list of people that I mentioned at a previous meeting who had been injured or indeed killed, at least half of those were male. Nigel Jones MP was attacked by a man with a samurai sword in his surgery and sustained injuries. His assistant, Andrew Pennington, male, was killed in that incident. David Amis was killed at his constituency surgery. Being male isn't a cloak of invisibility for these kind of issues, and we are all, in our different ways, potentially at risk. And some events may be more outside, you know, at the end of the spectrum and unexpected than others, but I think we need to remember that we are all potentially vulnerable here.
I just say now, Councillor Dupre is absolutely correct. And I think what I said after that was that I'm perhaps a little bit complacent maybe because people don't probably wouldn't want to do that to me or others in that my situation. Very often, of course, as she rightly pointed out, that does happen. It has happened with some pretty devastating consequences, as Lorna outlined. So I think it's important we're not complacent. We're not all hard-shelled either, are we? As Councillor Goldsack said, when you're told you don't care, it does rankle a bit, because by definition we do care, because we're in this position. So, but you're absolutely right, Lorna. Those cases are absolutely terrible, and we do need to be very sensible about how we deal with this. Thank you.
Of course, I think it's probably fair to say there are some issues about which I really don't care. And I'll come on to why once we've heard from Councillor Boulad.
Thank you. Just briefly, I do agree that abuse and intimidation affects everyone across characteristics. But if we think in terms of like potential risk assessments, I think it's an interesting debate around characteristics that are visible and invisible, such as, for example, disability, which can be visible or invisible. Of course, like having an accent like myself, that's a visible characteristic, as opposed to like other, like, I guess, ethnic or racial backgrounds that could be visible or invisible. So I think it's like a really interesting debate in terms of like which characteristics are more or less likely to lead to abuse and intimidation. And I don't have the data on this, but it would be very interesting to see if there's any research around that. But I do agree with the comments made that this issue affects everyone regardless of gender or any other protected or non-protected characteristic in that sense. Thank you.
Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I just realised I did want to come back on something else, and that is it. I mean, thank you for the report and for your concern. It's clear from the way you've presented in writing and in person that you do care about us, and we appreciate that. It matters. What we've not put into this, though, is the recognition that this has we don't want to lose our accessibility to the public. We don't want to lose our ability to look after the vulnerable. And that's what was in part of what I was saying in terms of providing phone numbers, even if it's not a direct line to the councillor in question. And I, at the moment, am tackling a bit of casework where the person is in distress. She really only works on a phone. She only works by text. I ask her to send the details on an email. We must all have had this issue because I prefer that. But that's not how she lives, and she's under enough problems. I just have to do some copy and paste. But if, on the other hand, councillors were offered a phone, I wonder if this has been considered as a way in which the public can contact us. We are tending to be a little bit likely, I think, to exclude some of our residents if we insist on email, when so many people don't use email readily. And the possibility of having a phone, a relatively cheap one that we can actually be contacted on. I mean, we did this during lockdown, just have a little bit of, not a burner phone. I think that implies probably the wrong atmosphere, but a cheap job doesn't have to be all bells and whistles our end, but something that could be given as a phone number. Possibility may not be the full message, the job of this report, but I think we've possibly not got that balance bit in. We've got the words democratic processes, and I quite like to have and service to the public in there as well, or accessibility to the public. But I know that this is really just saying this is a final process for this report. I appreciate.
Thank you for
Verbals
that.
enough for me.
Thank you. So there are a couple of points that I'd like to make. The first is, Mark, going back to your comment about what words mean. In terms of the kind of legal position, words mean what they mean. So when we're talking about abuse, harassment, intimidation, or threats of any form, I think certainly from a legal perspective, that would a judge would say the word abuse means abuse. And that obviously goes slightly to your point about one person's abuse is somebody else's, banter, quite. But it does raise an issue, and the next issue is about honesty. I can't remember who it was at the beginning discussed, the political environment that we work in. And I would be interested to know whether our MPs have been asked to sign up to this, and if so, whether they have done so. Because there is a very blurred line currently in the last 12, 24 months between political campaigning, which is saying the opposition are terrible, awful, dreadful people in a kind of traditional way, and actually saying the opposition have done this, which is awful and terrible and dreadful, but in fact isn't true. And I have found that this blurring of lines is being used by some people on a political basis. So they're making statements on, for example, their Facebook page, which simply just are not true. And so I think that one of the things that officers might want to take away with them is, how can politicians be encouraged to be honest, but still campaigning as politicians? Because, you don't want to take that away from them particularly. And I think that in the same way, I think we all accept that people wouldn't say to your face quite a lot of what they do say to you on social media. I think we also have to accept that people should not be able to get away with making false, misleading statements about matters that are sometimes really quite important. So because that is what I would call a dog whistle. It's being stated in order to rile people up against a third party, whoever it happens to be, or indeed whatever it happens to be, because it could be a council or parish council or whatever. So it's something, I think, that we're on a journey in terms of requiring honesty and people being upfront, in the same way that we're on a journey to say to very aggressive or abusive people, actually, you wouldn't treat me like that in real life, so you can't treat me like that on social media.
Yes, I just wanted to give an example of that. I was absolutely astonished recently to read a letter from a member of parliament for this in this county, describing the outcome of a meeting which I had chaired in this very room as being the council deciding to axe a project. We'd done anything but do that. We had been very clear that we were wanting this project to continue, albeit in circumstances which were challenging, and we were going to do our best to do it in a different way. A newspaper decided to use the word axed in the headline, and the member of parliament has now been writing to all and sundry about how terrible it is that the council has axed this project. And which is in the circumstance of the contractor actually going into liquidation, so totally outside our control. And I think everybody, members of parliament are not immune from this, but everybody needs to be careful about the words they use and the things they say and about each other. And I also, my second example is that over the last 12, 18 months, there have been certain people who have talked, as we all have, about the proposals for a sustainable travel zone in Cambridge, congestion charge, and have always prefixed the words congestion charge with the word hated. Now, we've been talking, this paper talks about debate, not hate. And that was very much debate, that was very much hate, not debate, because it was deliberately putting the word hate into every time that particular subject was mentioned in order to increase tension, to increase to increase the kind of inflammatory nature of the debate. That is absolutely unacceptable. And that those people, I think, knew what they were doing. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. And I think language is really important, and people in positions of power and responsibility have a duty and an obligation to use language responsibly.
Thank you for that. Anybody else got anything else they want to add? In which case, oh, sorry, Michelle. No, go on. Who wants to go first? Go on.
I was just going to pick up on a couple of points. I mean, obviously, one of the points Councillor Goldsack made in relation to how language is taken and what somebody may think of as banter is something else that somebody may take offence to. But just in terms of the harassment threshold, it's things which the person to whom the comments are directed, whether they find them threatening and abusive. So you have exactly the same kind of code responsibilities under the Code of Conduct. So all members have to treat other people with respect. So when I make the judgments on that, that's one of the things I take into account, and it is usually the modern English language interpretation of what's being said. So it's quite straightforward. And I think that one of the things I wanted to just pick up on that was also, we've got a lot of public sector bodies facing exactly the same problems, where these are quite useful and helpful to people. And absolutely, it's not about closing down people's access to services or members in this case, but actually an understanding of the ground rules, the expectations around behaviour from everyone, I think is important. You have an expectation around your behaviours, you all sign up to the code of conduct, but there has to be a corollary to that, in terms of people who we provide services to as well. Again, I just wanted to pick up around some of the persistent complaints, which I think is a really valid point. And that's something which I will take away. We do have a number of people who we have special contact arrangements in place for good reasons. We have to be able to justify that. But actually that leaves members sometimes exposed because they won't know what's going on. And I think that from my perspective, that's definitely something that I will pick up, take away and see what we can do about, because there'll be some circumstances we won't be able to share the data, the information with all of you because it might be personalized very much. We might share it with a group of members who are likely to be impacted by that individual. Or there's some cases where we might do something that is more generic so that when members are challenged on this, they have a response to it, because the council puts those arrangements in place for a very good reason sometimes. So I just wanted to pick that point up. And finally, I wanted to say that members, well, all of us in this public space have to be the guardians and protectors of standards of behaviour, because a diminution in those standards, if we're slagging each other off across the council chamber, that diminishes trust and respect in the democratic processes. It diminishes our decision making and the way that people see us. So we all have a responsibility in that. And very finally, one thing that came to my mind in relation to who was likely to be a victim in these, a recipient, that's the wrong word, a recipient of some of this challenge, and how resilient you are to doing it. There have been members that I've known who've been very resilient. Yes, I can handle this. I'm okay. I'm okay with this. This is a democratic process. This is battering across, the council chamber in debate. But actually, sometimes in those circumstances, the individual perpetrating the harassment, they end up not targeting the member, and they end up targeting members of their family instead. And that's when you start seeing people who have said, no, I'm all right, I'm okay, saying, that's right, that your heart, that it cuts to the heart of where I'm most vulnerable. And actually it's really important that actually we pick that up as well, and don't expect people to be resilient all of the time, because I can't imagine how hellish it must be for some of those members where their families are being attacked and pulled up and exposed in a way that they haven't agreed to. They're not elected. They didn't buy into the public debate. So I think we just need to be a bit mindful of that as well. Thank you, Chair.
I've just got 2 points. The first relates to what Councillor Slatter said. I think it's a very valid point about there not being a telephone number on the website. And I will speak to Mary and Monica, because I think that the number should be there. I'm afraid as regards having personal phones, that's not within the members' allowances scheme. The expectation is you will pay for all your calls and everything else via your basic allowance. So we wouldn't be able to do that, but we can certainly address the issue that you raised.
Come back on that, because that's a form of digital exclusion that is not helpful for us in serving our residents. I spelt out to you the sort of situations we get. Residents contacting us on WhatsApp, for example. It's really difficult to transfer information from WhatsApp to email. But even so, it has to be done, because some people really only work on a phone. They may not have another sort of device. They may not have email, but they do have a phone. So that sort of exclusion, that sort of shutting the door, I don't think is something that should be done automatically. It may need to be something that we look at again.
In that case, I think it's something for the independent remuneration panel to look at when they.
No, I'm talking. You provide us with a laptop.
Yeah. Now
the logic behind that is, I think, the same as making a phone available if required. It is not an indulgence. It's not a. foreign holiday or something, and it would be given back. It would be the property of the council. It would be given back when the person is no longer a councillor. I don't know how other people feel about that it's being treated differently, and I hadn't really thought about it before.
I just don't need another piece of equipment in my life. But yeah, no, I take your point. Councillor Bulat.
Just like, because I've seen in other councils, it's like a middle ground to this, because you have, if you don't want your personal phone number listed, so for example, I only have one phone, yes, I could buy another one for my allowance, but I don't have, as you don't share like 2 phones around me, and I have to separate because it's easier for me to have everything on one. But I've seen other councils that have like a way, kind of like a middle ground, like where we have like a phone, so the call is then, okay, this is the call for this councillor, is a genuine call and gets redirected. So there's a central number, and you can use whatever device you want. And then it means that the abusive calls are filtered. And then if it's a genuine casework, then it just gets directed to your personal phone or whatever you want to use. And if you want to have several phone numbers and pay for several phones, that's, up to you. So yeah, that's just one suggestion.
Councillor Dupre.
Never had a piece of council kit, don't want one, but I think that there is a legitimate discussion to be had, and the right place for that is the independent remuneration panel, about whether that ought to be something that ought to be offered to those members who want or need it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Go on, Michelle.
And the other thing I was going to come back on is in the actual report, starting at 3.3, there's options for you. So for me that has to implement this, it would be really helpful to know what you would like implemented. I mean, I know on the if I take, for example, Appendix 1, Councillor Goldsack raised some issues about that. And the question is, what would you like me to do? Would you, for example, would you just like it sent around as guidance? You might wish to use this if you would like. So it'd be really helpful to go through the points and actually get actions as to what you would like us to do in democratic services to implement this.
Splendid. Anyone want to go on then, John?
On a technical point, you can put a WhatsApp into an email.
Okay, we're getting to the edge of our collective expertise on this, aren't we? Right. So Michelle, would you like to so the first thing that we're asked is at 3.3, I imagine, which is effectively, do we want a statement about how people interact, how public interacts with us? Any views? It can't hurt, I would venture. Yep, Councillor Ambrose Smith is keen. So the option on that is for one, just for members to have, that they can use themselves if they want to.
So either we can put something on the council's website so that you can link to it rather than have a whole load of words taking up on your social media, or you can take away the example and decide which bits you would like, rather than us do it all completely, in the format that the LGA have done.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. I just in the same way as we were talking earlier that it's a personal thing, I think this is a personal thing. And I think put something up that we can reference if we want to, encourage members to have a look at it and let members make their own minds up as to whether they want to use it or not. I mean, I was thinking about what Councillor Slatter said. Somebody approaches me via Facebook Messenger, which happens, right? Approaches me by Facebook Messenger. Then I say to them, on this occasion, I will respond to you on Facebook Messenger, but this is not my normal course method of responding to you. And they contact me on Facebook Messenger for the next time they had a problem because they got an answer. So you have a decision to make, and I think those decisions are personal, and they very much, and I think this is the heart of what you're saying, they very much depend on the person that's making the approach. If it works for them, then I try and make it work for them in that media, right? If it's in email, and you can use I use my county account email, then it is traceable. It is on record. You know what I mean? If there was a call for information or anything, then what I've said and everything is on there. There's nothing on Facebook or anywhere. So that's why I try and go that way. But give the information and let members make their own choices. Because I think we're just in what, the 7 or 8 of us that's in here today. I think we've had 8 flavours of different stances on the subject. You know, so
your suggestion is really a framework of information and tools, which then members can individualize themselves.
I agree with your very succinct statement that said it can't hurt. So, but I don't think it should be mandated onto members. I think it's down to them.
Anybody else? Alex?
I think in my view, they're kind of like 2 different levels of this, because sometimes you can have like a statement, it's a very high kind of top level. It's not as detailed as the appendix, just like 2-3 lines saying, this is how we expect everyone to behave, without reference to specific words, because then we don't have to go into debate of what harassment means, what abuse means, just a, you know, kind of treat everyone with respect kind of statement, just to, you know, have our commitment to that. And then the detailed guidance, I do agree, it's up to each individual, whether they want to post something very detailed on their Facebook pages or their websites or whatever media they use, and how they define those terms. So yeah, I'm quite in the middle on this. I think like it's good to have like a kind of a broad statement of, this is what, you know, the council is endorsing, this Debate Not Hate campaign, and this is how we should all behave with respect. And then have like a framework and guidance, like Councillor Goldsack said, that we can use applicable to our individual media. Because, for example, on a Facebook, a resident's Facebook group, I might post something more detailed, and most Facebook groups have actually rules of the group that are already established, so you might not need to replicate those. Whereas if you have your own personal website and a contact form, you might have to create something new that's relevant to that context as well.
So can I just check that you are therefore happy to have something on the County Council's website where members are, and that the link will be sent to members, and members themselves will decide what they want to do with the information?
I think that's probably straightforward. Thank you, Michelle. Moving on then to the regular member e-bulletin, which is being developed, so hurrah, and relationship with police. So that is a bit trickier, I think, isn't it? I think that if the local constabulary can provide information and occasional training opportunities, that's great. But again, we know from the action plan that we've gone through that not a lot of people attended many of the sessions. 12, 4, 9, 5 out of 61. Go on, Michelle.
This is just a proposal, and I don't know whether it's feasible. I don't know whether, speaking to Phil Hill, who is our contact with the constabulary, whether it's worth having a members' briefing for an hour, inviting a representative from the constabulary to enable members to talk privately about issues they're facing. If you don't think it's appropriate, then that's fine, we won't do it. But I just wonder that might be an option for members.
Just to add to that, I mean, if, you know, where we've got elections, you know, where elections are forthcoming, we will have a single point of contact for the elections with the police. It may be, you know, it may be worth getting in early with the single point of contact to talk to them about some of the things the members experienced during not only the run up to the election, but prior to that as well, so that they have an understanding of that. But that's certainly something that we can facilitate. And a lot of that is around educating the police as to what members put up with sometimes, and the serious impacts it can have, and also bringing forward that good practice which they have in other areas where the police are really important in dealing with some of this behaviour as well, certainly at the more serious end of it.
Thanks for that. I would just sound a note of caution. I did attend an online briefing, which I know was offered to members across the country in relation to the Middle Eastern issues that we face currently, which was conducted by the Metropolitan Police. And it was really wordy. So I think we want nice, punchy, concise presentations if we're going to have them. Mark.
It's fine. Mine was covered in the last comment, not your comment, the one before. Thank you.
Splendid. Okay, thank you. Right, next is tailored risk assessments. What do we think? Do we feel there is a market for tailored risk assessments for elected members? Lorna is shaking yes. Philippa? So I think that looks like, Michelle, something to do some work on there. Go on.
That shouldn't be one of the things you do when they first get elected, and then they get.
Well, yes, because the issues facing councillors change, as do their personal circumstances. So, yeah, absolutely. Michelle will be doing dynamic risk assessments, it says in the paper. Okay, moving on to prioritising councillor wellbeing, recognising and considering how your council can support councillor wellbeing. Again, any comment?
Can you give me an example? I take your definition earlier of my wording question, and I take that as, what do you mean by well-being? No, it waters it down.
Really, it's that a whole person approach in terms of mental health, well-being, physical well-being, being able to perform your role effectively. So, you know, for example, we've heard from Councillor du Preez how important surgeries are in her role. It would be very unfortunate if she was prevented from doing that and would prevent her performing the role in that area, but she's got to feel safe in terms of doing that. So I think that there are things that we can offer individual members in terms of support in very particularized circumstances. There's some things we can offer members for a shorter period of time. We offer members who have different needs, who have disabilities, support in different ways to be able to perform their role in the best possible way that we can. I don't think that this is any different. We want to, you know, just like we do with employees, you want to put those things in place. So it may be that they have someone to talk to about those issues. It may be that we provide references through the EAP scheme. It may be that we put in practical arrangements around meetings sometimes, because we have had occasions where individuals have turned up and are a threat to a particular member because of their course of conduct beforehand. So it will be very particularized in those areas, Councillor Goldsack. I think that, you know, as I said earlier, members' needs will differ from time to time as they go through life, and that circumstances change. And we need to be able to react to that. And it's not, you know, it's not like you're a load of sheep that we dip you and you all get the same thing and then we move on. We want to be able to treat individual members more holistically, make sure we're responding to their needs, and they will all be different. You know, it may be we supply with gin. No, that's a joke. We won't be supplying with gin. That would be an inappropriate use of the council's resources. But yeah,
I'd rather have gin than another phone, to be honest. But that's
but it will be tailored individually to that person. It may take a number of different forms.
If I may, Chair, that's what I hoped it was going to be. So thank you for that. As with all of this information, we have to be, I won't say aware, but we have to be, we have to be careful with the information. So let me play a scenario, and there's reason for this. You play a scenario where that members come to you, you've helped and supported them with mental health issues of the way they're fitting, and then you don't think they're fit to do their job. Where do you take that information? What do you do with it? Do you see what I mean? Where do the lines of well-being and support come, and action and support come afterwards? You know, I'm sure both groups have got health issues at this moment in time, and there comes an issue where, you know, that's out of our hands. You know, we are elected members. You know, we don't have a medical to come in to say whether we can do this job or not. So I'm just conscious that we've got to be very careful. Well, I said it. We've got to be careful with what we do with that data, and where the lines have become blurred, because they will become blurred.
Thank you very much. I think that is a really good question. That's certainly something that I've personally experienced in the past with members. So, you know, obviously when you get elected for a member, you get elected as for a period of time, particularly around issues with dementia or degenerative diseases, there comes a point when it is impacting on a member's ability to do their job. So the councils that I've worked in before have tried to manage that process with the person and with their family to make sure that we keep them at work within their role as long as possible. And it's an ongoing dialogue with the family. So I've had some members who, you know, we've had to have very difficult conversations with. They've held offices, you know, vice chairman of the council or whatever, that really, you know, they really want to keep doing, but they're not able to do it. And you have to keep having those conversations with the family. Have had other situations where members have had serious mental health crises, where the family has contacted us for advice and support because they're not well to be at work and it's causing issues in their work as well. So in those circumstances, we will generally talk to the member about it. We'll talk often to the group leader to see if they've got any points of access, and we will be part of that process. We won't make a judgment on whether members are able to perform their role. We will have those conversations with their groups, but importantly with their families in terms of the best way that we can support them. And there is some, you know, in the cases that I've had to deal with, it is a really sad and traumatic incident where you know, particularly in degenerative conditions, where you see that, you know, somebody deteriorating, you know, still trying to do a job that they really love. I mean, nobody does this job for the money. They do it because they love it, and seeing that taken away and their ability to do that job taken away is very hard. But managing that with the family and with the groups is actually the way forward, I think, with that. The council won't ever make a decision about, you know, they're fit to do this job or not. That's not our role, and we can't do that. That's up to the electorate and the elected member to decide. But in those circumstances, we usually work with the family, and in other cases, you know, with the group as well, to make decisions or to help them inform decisions that they might want to talk to their family member about.
Splendid. Yes, good point. Right, we move on then to the Employment Assistance Programme, which I think Mrs. Rowe covered earlier on. And then there are a number of various options that we might want to discuss. So a small working group of councillors and officers, regular surveys of members, open door drop-in opportunities, wellbeing and councillor safety champions. Any thoughts? Alex?
Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of the safety champion, because on the one hand, I think in principle, it's a good idea. So for example, if I was to do that role, like for example, in the labor group meetings, you can leave 10 minutes at the end. There's an open space for people to raise issues, which to be honest, you never have, at least in our group meetings. It's always just discussing the business. So you never think about well-being or has anything really bad happened. So actually having that space in the first place, just for people to have an open forum to speak about their issues could be good. Like I'm speaking about like kind of our internal group meetings. But on the other hand, I'm also thinking if myself or someone else was to be that person, you have your group colleagues coming to you with very difficult issues, then you end up yourself perhaps also experiencing some issues yourself, being overwhelmed with that. And that's something that happened to me, for example, not with fellow councillors, friends and colleagues from other councils who, you know, are close friends. So when people experience something really difficult and then they come to you saying, well, I'm thinking of resigning or I'm thinking about quitting politics, and it's so difficult to deal, and this ends up affecting you as well, and you like questioning your own, I guess, life in politics, because you see the worst things that happen to others and you think, could this happen to me? And then you get like quite anxious about this. So I'm not sure where to draw kind of the line in terms of, if we were to have this champion, where would the responsibility be? Like, are you supposed to have those conversations, just collect, I guess, in a research capacity some issues and then discuss with officers? Because if you end up being, I guess, in a therapist function without being qualified, it is extremely difficult and could actually exacerbate some of your own issues that you're experiencing. If you have potentially, I have, you know, quite a small group, but potentially 8 colleagues in my case telling issues that they experience to me, it could be quite overwhelming, especially in larger groups. Imagine if you are the champion for a group of like 20 or more, and potentially having a lot of people coming with problems to you, and you're not necessarily equipped or qualified or prepared to deal with those. Thank you.
Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I'd be wary of a champion. for a variety of reasons, really. I think it's a bit like safeguarding. I mean, it's a general thing, or health and safety at work. It's sort of, we are all responsible for one another's well-being. And if we look at it more like a duty of care, I think much as it applies to our staff, I mean, I find it quite useful reading the stuff that comes out, particularly for the staff. And I've chipped in on some of the physiotherapy, actually. But this, I think, is actually well-intentioned, but doesn't really fit our lifestyle, I don't think. So I think it's just a general awareness is more what I'd be wanting. Where was it? I think the regular surveys of members, it's a kind thought, but I'm not sure that works either, because we really want people to talk at the time in a timely way, so things don't get worse. We talked about the well-being, and I think of a city council colleague of mine who suffered racial abuse, and really she was asking, she really needs to talk to somebody who's been in a similar situation and thinking, why do I carry on? And that might be a very particular peer group that hopefully the staff would have got, Emma and Michelle would have found out about. And sometimes, and I'm talking on the phone, as you say, sometimes you've got the right friend, you may well not. Somebody who's actually put up with it in Greater Manchester and just knows what it feels like. It's that sort of thing, I think, is particular rather than the more physical diseases and other problems. So I would comment.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? What are your views on a small working group of councillors and officers to identify gaps in support and share intelligence?
I would say, Chair, I'm happy to play a role in that. I think it will be useful. Yeah.
Anyone else? Alex?
Yeah, I think it would be useful to actually discuss some of those things in more detail, because with the champion role, like, it depends how you define it as. So, for example, I would actually like to have like a certain, maybe not a formal role, but a certain space in our like group meetings to just say, for example, if we did even this action plan that I'm on this committee today, but like for me in the next group meeting, the next Labour group meeting, to say, actually I have 10 minutes to discuss on the agenda what has been spoken about today and inform my colleagues about some of the actions and some of the support available. So that kind of, I guess, is more of an ambassador role, that you're taking some information from the council and support available and keeping your group informed about that, rather than having one-to-one conversations and trying to solve issues. So actually having a working group, we could discuss in more detail some of those things, including how could we define a role or like a person responsible in a way for feeding back this information.
Yes, I tend to agree. Lorna, did you want to add anything?
I don't know if it still exists, but I remember a small working group around member training in this organisation. It still exists. I wonder whether that's something that might potentially be expanded to cover not just training, but also just generally member support and member well-being as well as training.
Yep, that sounds like a good idea. Michelle's, David.
Thank you. I disagree with the 43rd Working Party. I think the third point bullet point actually covers that. I think the officers would get to know quite a bit about the problems that exist for councillors. So there'd be no need to have that Working Party at all. That's my opinion. And I thought the fourth point was very well put across by yourself, and I totally agree with you on that. Totally agree. Thank you.
And what about expanding the remit of the member training working group to include member sport?
No, I still keep it. No, I don't agree with that personally.
Anybody else got anything to comment on? Mark?
A very quick comment, and that is that as one that had an unsuccessful re-election, not at this council, but at another council, I think there's a bit of a duty of care to immediate ex-members, and I think sometimes that's lost. So we've got to be careful how far we take this. But I do think sometimes if we're going to do Lorna's proposal and expand the group, that's maybe something that group could look at. It depends how far you want to go, but I do think in the immediate aftermath of what's quite a tumultuous period, there is potential for mental health issues for people. Those elected as well, by the way, but also those unelected.
Right. Any other comments on this? We have a bit of a disagreement with regard to whether or not to expand the member training working group to cover member support. Michelle.
I don't know if this will help Councillor Ambrose Smith, but the member training group doesn't meet very often, probably about a couple of times a year. So we wouldn't be analysing it sort of every 3 months or anything like that. But I'm happy, obviously, to go by whatever members would like.
Thank you for that explanation. But I still believe that bullet point 3 does it all.
So you'd rather leave it as open door or drop-in opportunities? What does everybody else think?
I do actually think that one of the benefits of having a group of members who are spending a bit of time occasionally thinking about this is that it develops within all groups, or hopefully does anyway, but gives the opportunity to develop in all groups that culture of care towards one another. And also perhaps potentially gives those in leadership roles within their groups the tools to do that job, and fresh ideas about how to do that. And I think making sure that that is part of the culture across the organisation, and particularly within the political groups, is a really worthwhile thing to do.
So your proposal would be what?
As I don't think I formally proposed it, but I suggested it, expanding the role of that group to cover member support and well-being, as well as training, and to ensure that within groups operate in different ways, that all groups have whatever mechanism suits them to ensure that this issue is on their agenda.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Slatter.
Yeah, as chair of the member training panel group, I want to get the name right, shouldn't I? Thank you. One of the things we were making the point of is that we very often can't access the training when it's live, but we want to make a lot and more use of recorded. And I think in that context, I will put it to the group that we could add in and make sure there is available the information about looking after ours and one another's well-being, which is there, but more in a physical and more obvious mental health way. But where we have this, where it's where it is the result of a particular incident, that's when you need the help. Yeah, there's no point waiting for something that's going to be in the programme. So that having it on tap, on record, I think is probably something we could explore as a group, see what others think.
Mark?
This will be my last comment on this subject, but we've gone well here. I think this interesting discussion, debate, call it what you will, is exactly what I was alluding to earlier, and why I think it's down to personal choice. I think David has highlighted a very real thing here, that he thinks as long as there's an open door policy and I can come and talk to somebody where I want, that's my method of doing. And David should be allowed to do that. But if you want to establish a working group and have a discussion about it and come up with other ideas, that's also fine. But it doesn't mean that that's not a mandate on all members that this is what you've got to do. And I think as long as we approach it in that way, I'm very open to have, for those that want to be on that kind of meeting group, or those that don't. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle.
I would tend to agree with that. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is that the chair of the member training panel puts to the member training panel perhaps an extension of remit to cover as we've set out, and the officers enable the open door drop-in opportunities, having given it some thought. And we then leave it up to each member to make individual decisions about this, and indeed about what they want to put on their websites and so on and so forth. Everybody happy? Michelle?
Just quickly coming back on that, not obviously nothing against what you've just proposed. Just an example, if like the next meeting of the member training panel, which I think is in April, it might be worth having health, and it says to invite health and safety to actually perhaps look at risk assessments. So there's that type of thing we could do, rather than just general discussion. We can make it quite focused if that's helpful.
That sounds very useful. Go on, David.
We're not going forward with the item 4, bullet point 4, the safety champion.
I didn't get a great sense of support for that particularly. So I've tried to combine the two elements that had a modicum of support. Okay, well, that being the case, shall we draw that debate to a conclusion? Splendid. We move on then to the last item on the agenda, which is the agenda plan. Michelle, Emma, do you have any comments on this? That would seem to be a no. Oh.
Chair, the item on the disciplinary procedure for statutory officers, that is a legal requirement, and we need to reflect the proper processes within our constitution. So we've undertaken a review. So basically that will be a constitutional change, a change that you would need to consider.
Okay, anybody else got any questions or comments? That being the case, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and for all of the reports. Thank you very much. Have a safe journey home. I might be walking.